It's 1940 and fun hasn't been invented yet. Life is a nightmare. A few months after Pearl Harbor, millions of Americans were tuned into President Roosevelt's fireside chat. The question on everybody's mind was, are we safe and will the Japanese attack again? And Roosevelt was like, nah man, we're good.
Good night and God bless America.
That very night, off the coast of Santa Barbara, a Japanese submarine bombarded the shores. The attack didn't do very much physical damage, but it did cause a lot of
emotional damage.
The next day over the city of Los Angeles, a weather balloon flew off course. Alarms were sounded. It was all hands on deck. Anti-aircraft guns engaged this weather balloon in what would become known as the Battle of Los Angeles. The weather balloon was easily defeated, but all the commotion caused several car accidents and a few heart attacks. The American people were on edge, but thankfully, they never gave in to irrational fear and started targeting civil rights. Just kidding, of course they did. All along the West Coast, authorities rounded up 120,000 Japanese Americans and sent them to internment camps as spies for Imperial Japan. Eventually, this fear turned into anger, and anger to revenge. And if you know anything about America, revenge is their cup of tea. So they gathered up a couple aircraft carriers, sailed deep into Japanese-controlled water, then launched a bombing run on Tokyo. Revenge? Check. Get home safe? Well, most of the bombers ran out of fuel and crashed somewhere into mainland China. This was known as the Doolittle Raid. Not because they did little, but because the man in charge was named Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. However, the raid did do little damage, but that wasn't the point. It was about revenge and letting the Japanese know America was coming. Japan hunts down those pilots seeking revenge. In the process, they kill 250,000 Chinese civilians. Oops. One good revenge deserves another. The Americans figure out the travel itinerary for the man who planned Pearl Harbor. They find Yamamoto's plane and shoot it down. Revenge is like a chain reaction that sets off more chain reactions until it eventually goes nuclear. The war in the Pacific is bookended with two tragedies, Pearl Harbor and the dropping of the atomic bomb. The first major engagement is the Battle of the Coral Seas. Ships are dipsy-doodling all over the place, yet never actually see each other. This is the first time in history a naval engagement is fought entirely in the air. Even though the US had taken more damage, they had denied Japan an important objective, Port Moresby. Japan will make a second attempt at Port Moresby, this time over land. The Australians are like, crikey! They fight a personal battle in steep jungle terrain during the Kakoda track campaign, denying Japan the port. Japanese expansion technically even reached American soil. They landed on these two Alaskan islands, hoping to draw resources away from the real objective. Okay, we got one more island to name, then we can all go home for the weekend. This little guy here, midway across the Pacific Ocean. Any ideas? Midway? Bingo, good enough. Let's get out of here. This little island of Midway was Japan's next obvious objective. What wasn't obvious to the Japanese was that the Americans had been listening to their radio transmission for months and knew all about their sneaky little plan. So they sent 3 carrier groups to set up an ambush. Both sides trying to sneak up on the other, but neither knowing exactly where the other guy is. After an intense back and forth, the Americans gained the upper hand. Japan loses 4 carriers at Midway. This is a devastating blow to their offensive capability. Now, all they can do is wait and hope that the Americans are too fat and lazy to bring the fight 4,000 miles across the ocean. America takes that bet, and in anticipation of how much blood will be spilled, they produced so many Purple Hearts that in 2003 there was still 120,000 left. Now, America had agreed with the rest of the Allies to a Europe-first strategy. But see this big patch of green here? That's Europe. And this big patch of blue? That's the Pacific Ocean. You don't need all your ships to fight Hitler. As the Navy goes, so goes the Marines. And it just so happens Marines are great for invading islands. The Americans used a strategy called island hopping. By taking key islands, others would be cut off and forced to surrender. Eventually. Just 8 months after Pearl Harbor, US Marines landed on Guadalcanal. Fighting in the Pacific was a different ball of wax than fighting in Europe. Not just because of the sweltering heat, the snakes, or the malaria. Most men understood this comes with the territory. What no one was ready for was the psychological terror the Japanese would inflict. The Bushido mindset means the Japanese don't run and they aren't afraid to die. In fact, they expect to. If they do surrender, it is just a fake out. They booby-trap everything, including their dead. At night, they would sneak into the trenches. In the morning, the Americans would wake up to horrific surprises. The jungle became a haunted house, making it impossible to relax, causing a condition referred to as jungle jitters, resulting in Americans shooting at anything that moves. including each other. The fighting was ugly, but the Marines adapt and overcome, and they secure Guadalcanal. This was the first significant loss of ground for the Japanese, but there are many, many more battles to come, each with a unique flavor of nightmare. Like the assault on Tarawa. A small island big enough for an airfield was surrounded by a coral reef. During the assault on the island, the tide went down. Landing craft from the second wave got caught up on the reef. Still a few hundred yards from the beach, the Marines had to dismount and wade through chest-deep water. They had to try to make their way to the beach under heavy Japanese fire, doing that slow, awkward water run. Keep going, buddy. You're almost there. Yeah, I got this. I'm almost there. Next, hop Marshall Islands and then on to the Marianas. Now the main island was within bombing range of the B-29 Superfortress. That means America can walk right into Japan's house with their shoes on. And everybody knows, the Japanese hate shoes in the house. So Japan brings the big guns. However, so does the US. The Battle of the Philippine Seas. Shot down planes rain out of the sky like dollar bills at a strip club. However, the ratio is far from even. By this point in the war, Japan had lost most of its highly skilled pilots, and the new replacements only received a fraction of training the Americans got. The Americans dominate the air in what becomes known as the Mariana Turkey Shoot. Churchill famously said in the Battle of Britain, "You can always take one with you." The Japanese take that idea to the next level. Tojo decrees 100 million souls will die in honor. This involves mass suicide attacks known as banzai charges. Some Japanese citizens would join in using nothing but sharpened sticks. As promised, MacArthur returns to the Philippines, but he's not welcome. Japan launches what's left of its navy to try to dislodge the Americans, resulting in the largest naval battle in history. This is when Japan starts using the infamous kamikaze attack, which made training time for pilots even more efficient. And if you flunked out of pilot school, don't worry. They still had boats, manned torpedoes, and human mines to get the job done. Japan has been paid back many times over for Pearl Harbor. However, the cost has also been high for the Americans, and the worst is yet to come. Less savory methods of ending the war start being entertained. Okay, hear me out. We drop bombs, but they also catch everything on fire. Tokyo is constructed mostly of paper and wood. Within hours, 60% of the city is destroyed. Over 100,000 civilians die and millions are left homeless. Maybe this was too far. Nah, the Americans bombed 67 other Japanese cities with the same ruthlessness. Over 90% of the American public support these tactics rather than lose more American lives. These atrocities do nothing to weaken the Japanese willpower. All the Americans can do is hop to the next island. This is one of the most iconic pictures of World War II. It was taken at Iwo Jima. 3 of the men in this picture never made it off that island. Next was Okinawa, the last stepping stone before the home island. The 3-month battle is known as the Typhoon of Steel, giving just a preview of what the invasion of the home island will look like. Then, at this critical point in the war, only 82 days into his 4th term, President Roosevelt dies. This makes you president, Mr. Truman. What are you going to do about the bomb? What bomb? Roosevelt had not told his vice president about the Manhattan Project. And now Truman was president and had to make one of the most significant choices in human history. He had 3 options. 1. Surround Japan and bomb them into submission, which seemed unlikely since every major Japanese city was already a smoldering pile of rubble, and they continued to shrug it off like a flesh wound. 2. Invade the main island. This plan was called Operation Downfall. American casualties were estimated up to 1 million, and the Japanese as high as 5 to 10 million. Or, option 3. Be the first to use the most horrifying weapon ever made by man on a city of innocent people with no idea of long-term effects. 3. I choose 3. Maybe drop a second one just in case? On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb named Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Fat Man is dropped on Nagasaki. The number of deaths from the 2 bombs is impossible to know. Estimates range from 110,000 to 210,000. The Japanese foreign minister calls August 9th a bad day. However, it's unclear if he was referring to the second bomb or because the Soviets attacked Manchuria that same day. The emperor releases a statement saying, "The war situation has developed, not necessarily to Japan's advantage." Japan surrenders unconditionally on August 14th. As military police surround Tojo's house, they hear a muffled gunshot from inside. Tojo had a doctor draw a circle around the location of his heart. He pulls the trigger but jerks and shoots himself in the gut. The American soldiers burst in and give him first aid. But before he can stand trial for his crimes, he will need to have his rotten teeth replaced. His dentures are made by an American who marks them with Morse code. Remember Pearl Harbor. At Camp Buchenwald, a Polish engineer who was imprisoned there finds out that the Americans are getting close. He had constructed a secret telegraph machine and was able to get out a message that read, "To Allies, the Army of General Patton. This is Buchenwald concentration camp. SOS. We request help. They want to evacuate us. The SS want to destroy us. 3 long minutes of silence goes by. KZBU, hold out, rushing to your aid. Staff of 3rd Army. A rush of hope that has not been felt in years fills the room. Some of the prisoners faint. The concentration camps were first reported by the Red Army, but those reports were not believed until the Allies saw it with their own eyes. They did not fully understand the true nature of what had been happening. What greeted the Americans at the gate of Buchenwald was 21,000 skeletons in striped pajamas. Eisenhower made the media document these sights in great detail in case there was future deniers. The world needed answers to why this had happened. Fortunately, Nazis are good little record keepers. At the Nuremberg trials, high-ranking Nazi officers are prosecuted for their war crimes. The defense, if I was just following orders, doesn't cut it. During the Tokyo trials, the question is asked, if the Emperor could have stopped this with just a few words, why didn't he sooner? Ultimately, the Emperor isn't prosecuted. His cooperation will play a critical role in rebuilding Japan. Plus, look at him. Japanese Napoleon Dynamite and cosplay wasn't the problem. As the biggest war ever fought comes to an end, the 3 allies meet in Yalta to decide the fate of Europe. But it becomes clear that everyone's intentions are different. Goodwill and cooperation begin to evaporate. The mood of the meeting becomes cold, which will set the tone for the next 45 years.